Okay, what is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to be showing you my architecture video portfolio. This is a video that I put together in my final weeks of my BA Honours Architecture degree, and this is a video that showcases my portfolio throughout my final year. The reason why I've done a video is because it made sense for me to continue my research into film theory and produce a video at the end to showcase my portfolio, as essentially my project is all about film and film framing. So just to bear in mind, we had a maximum of 10 minutes to present, hence why the video is quite fast paced and it has a lot of information in it, as I did try to cram in as much information as possible within the 10 minutes. So if it's quite fast paced and obviously there's a lot of information, if you've got any questions, just ask me down below and I will be answering questions. So yeah, sit back, relax and enjoy. Hello, my name is Thomas Rowntree and this is my final presentation, my portfolio submission. Today I'm going to be presenting the sequel. So before we begin to present the sequel, it's really important to take a recap and look at the sequence, which is the movie that comes before. So the sequence begins in exploring the movement on my site. Following research into the process of Bernard Tschumi and his methods in breaking down action into the event, plan and movement in the plan, I began to form my own rules in understanding movement. The quote from the Manhattan transcript, "The question becomes whether one can organise architectural drawings as a movement sequence," became key to my exploration. I decided to break down movement into time, direction and speed using film as a medium of study and framing as an anchor for my project. Using film theorists such as Deleuze and Sergei Eisenstein as theoretical inspiration, I used my movement exploration to form fields of information which I applied film editing techniques to, which leads me to the sequel. So the sequel is a thesis that explores how we can use film framing and sequences of spaces to speed up or slow down the rate at which ex-convicts can reform. It is a monument that tells the story and experience of the convicts within their first 12 months of rehabilitation. As I began to do my research into ex-convicts, I understood that 39% of ex-convicts reoffend within the first 12 months of their rehabilitation, so I decided to set up a 12-month timeline which would describe the ex-convicts' journey back into society, with each month representing a space of stories. So before we begin to create a timeline, it was really important to get the correct backlighting. So I began with looking into Dilys Scofidio and understanding the process behind his work. The slow house is a weekend house that follows a curve anchored by a hinge that forms a sequence of spaces. The hinge allows for a melodic sequence of spaces to be created, which also forms a rhythm of spaces. Understanding how the slow house uses an anchor to form these spaces allows me to form my own anchor to create a sequence of spaces that would alter speed and direction. Using the field formed within the sequence, I created the journey that would then become the timeline. Though the timeline would be set, the spaces that follow the timeline would change depending on the stage that they are at along the 12 months. The spaces could change in width, height and angles could alter the speed that they move through the spaces. Divergence could also provide a choice to what route they want to take. Using a 90-degree hinge, there could be vertical as well as horizontal timelines that would force people above or underground. Began to create models and do initial sketches to try and understand the formation of the timeline and how we can use geometry to understand how level changes could work, how these widenings and narrowings of spaces would actually change the atmosphere. And this leads me to Labuse Woods, and I read the book War and Architecture, which explores the deconstruction of buildings in Bosnia during the war and believes that their form must be respected as integrity. Labuse Woods explores natural forms of healing in architecture, and it explores the scar as a demolition due to the war as something that cannot be erased. Instead, Woods provides a new fabric that fuses the remaining post-war buildings and acts as a mark of pride. Though the new fabric would fuse onto the existing buildings, there is a clear contrast between the two materials in geometry and materiality. Though there is a visual contrast, there will be an internal fusion between the two fabrics in maintaining the story of the war. Therefore, my thesis could act as a monument that takes pride in the experience of the ex-convict's path back into society, but could also run through existing buildings, so there is moments of education and interaction between the existing society. I then produced a series of drawings and models once again in response to this. And this is when I began to reintroduce my movement exploration from the site. So using the frames captured and analysed during my exploration, I began to create a framework that would form the external skin of the building. Using Daniel Lipskin and the Jewish Museum as a key precedent, I began to understand how I could use voids that slice through the building to create contrast between light and dark spaces. He also uses a crisscrossing window method to create internal shadows that add to the atmosphere. I also read an article about Louis Kahn called Light Matters to understand how I could create an internal atmosphere that would reflect the confusing journey of the convict. Using concrete as a canvas, I could create contrast between light and dark by introducing a series of slits. I made a framing model that explores this, and this leads me to my final design. So the final design is constructed using this timeline and having these frames that follow the timeline to create 20 panels and modules that represent each frame along the timeline. Between the panels there are open slits that allow for natural ventilation and lighting strategies and also add to the internal experience. Each module will be made of bespoke in situ concrete, and 4 components, the front wall, the back wall, the roof and the internal layout, will make up each module. So the floor plan, the story of the convict. So the floor plan describes the 12-month experience back in society, and between months 0 and 1, the timeline begins at the west side of the building. The entrance has been designed to the width and height of a prison cell to indicate that this is the moment they are leaving prison and entering their rehabilitation journey. Between months 2 and 5, a series of spaces describe their journey back into society. Ramps and stairs aim to change speed and direction, and diversions provide a choice. Level changes take people above and below ground along a vertical timeline. A series of changes through these spaces emphasise the confusion and emotional journey they begin in their reform. There are views into the existing building to provide moments of integration and education of the current society. Throughout these spaces, the slits in between the modules create harsh shadows and contrast between light and dark. The concrete essentially acts as a canvas for those shadows that add to the internal experience. As my building moves through the existing building, the internal detail shows that my building is supporting the structure of the existing building and has an internal fusion. Though the concrete material of my proposal visually opposes the brickwork of the existing, it was important for there to be this internal connection. At 6 months, the midpoint of the journey provides a room full of mirrors to reflect on themselves and their journey of rehabilitation so far. There's a central rotating mirror that continues my Dilys Cofidio research in creating virtual space and distortion. Between the months 7 and 9, after they have reflected on their journey so far, they are now deep enough to begin to make their own choices. The following spaces provide a series of openings to give them the choice of which space they want to move in and provides further integration with the surrounding society. These openings emphasise the choice that the ex-convicts have to either continue their journey of rehabilitation or go and re-offend and go back to prison. The open spaces are also much brighter to create a more comfortable environment, and you can either pass into the more public realm or private gardens at the back of the building. Between months 10 and 11, once they've decided to continue their journey, they move through a second existing building that contains a different type of working environment. Views into these spaces provide moments of education about the existing society before they finish their journey. As they move through this existing building, there is a drastic level change to provide greater views into the surrounding environment and adding a feeling of being on top. The slits between these modules also widen to provide greater views into the surrounding society. And at the 12 months to finish their journey, the building ramps down to the exit to force people to move faster through these final spaces to describe the momentum they build in their final month of rehabilitation. These final spaces are the widest throughout the journey. Once we now know the story of the building, it was really important for my landscape plan and the landscape of the building to extend the story of the sequel into the surrounding environment. So to tell the internal story of the building, I extended some of the geometry into the surrounding landscape and created patches of hard and soft landscaping. This landscape was really important in encouraging integration with those spaces and emphasises the ex-convict's journey impact on the society. The benches and furniture within the landscape and the internal spaces have been designed in response to the movement frame corresponding to that piece of furniture, creating bespoke furniture that responds to the movement frames. The post-production book holds the visuals that describe the atmosphere at each stage of the timeline. The visuals show the narrow, dark, meandering journey within the first half of the building. diversions that take people above and below ground with narrow streets of light. And moving into more open spaces with greater sunlight and access to the surrounding environment. And that is the sequel. Thank you for watching. Yeah.